Mahmoud's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. In the back of his ambulance, a 6-year-old girl was taking her final breaths, and outside, exploding bombs had blocked the road. 72 hours ago, Mahmoud was just an ordinary ambulance driver. Now he had become the only man using Gaza's last ambulance to try to get 127 people to the hospital. This story will tell you how Mahmoud transformed from an ordinary driver into a legend, and the ending, believe me, it made even me cry. Mahmud Al-Zahra was 35 years old, an ambulance driver in Gaza. When he started work in early 2019, he saw this profession as just a normal job. He went to work at 8 a.m. and returned home at 6 p.m. He lived a quiet life with his wife Fatma and their 8-year-old daughter Noor in a small apartment in Gaza's Rimel neighborhood. Their home was modest, but filled with love and laughter. Every evening when he came home from work, Noor would run to the door and throw her arms around him. "How many people did you help today, Dad?" she would ask with bright, curious eyes. 2 or 3 people, Mahmoud would typically respond, settling into his favorite chair. "I took them to the hospital. The doctors treated them, and they got better." Noor would beam with pride. "You're a very good person, Dad. You save people every day." Mahmoud would chuckle at these words, ruffling her hair gently. He never saw himself as anything special or heroic. He was simply an ordinary man doing an ordinary job, earning a modest living to support his family. The truth was, when Mahmoud first started learning to drive an ambulance, he struggled immensely. Gaza's narrow, winding streets presented a constant challenge. The traffic was unpredictable and often chaotic. Roads that existed one day might be blocked or damaged the next due to construction or conflict. During his first few months on the job, Mahmoud frequently found himself lost, having to radio for directions or rely on his more experienced colleagues to guide him to his destinations. "I don't think I'm cut out for this work," he confided to his colleague Ahmed one particularly frustrating day after getting lost twice during emergency calls. Ahmed, a veteran driver with 15 years of experience, placed a reassuring hand on Mahmoud's shoulder. "Be patient with yourself, my friend," Ahmed counseled. "This city has its own rhythm, its own personality. Making friends with Gaza takes time, but once you do, you'll know every stone, every corner, every shortcut like the back of your hand." Ahmed's wisdom proved prophetic. As the months turned into years, Mahmoud gradually developed an intimate knowledge of Gaza's complex geography. He learned which neighborhoods experienced the heaviest traffic during morning rush hour, which alternate routes could save precious minutes during an emergency, and which areas required extra caution due to ongoing construction or security concerns. He memorized the locations of every hospital, clinic, and medical facility in the territory. By 2020, Mahmoud had transformed from a struggling newcomer into one of the hospital's most reliable and experienced drivers. The dispatchers began assigning him the most challenging cases, complicated births where every second mattered, elderly patients suffering heart attacks who needed immediate cardiac care, severe trauma cases from construction accidents or traffic collisions. Mahmoud approached each assignment with the same steady calm and determination that had become his trademark. "You've become the human GPS of this place," Hospital Director Dr. Salim would often joke during staff meetings. "I swear you know every street, every alley, every building in Gaza better than the city planners do." Mahmoud had grown comfortable with such praise from his colleagues and supervisors. It was true that he had developed an encyclopedic knowledge of Gaza's streets and neighborhoods. His fellow drivers would sometimes tease that he could navigate the city blindfolded if necessary. What Mahmoud didn't realize was that life was preparing to test that very claim in the most literal way possible. October 7, 2023, started like any other night shift for Mahmoud. He had reported for duty at 10 p.m. expecting the usual routine, perhaps a few emergency calls, maybe a late-night birth or an elderly patient needing transport to receive dialysis treatment. The first call came at 2:30 a.m., then another at 2:45. And then a third just before 3. Within the span of 30 minutes, everything changed forever. The bombardment had begun with intensity that none of them had experienced before. During the initial hours of his shift, Mahmoud assumed he was dealing with a particularly busy but otherwise normal night. 1 or 2 emergency cases, some routine patient transports, nothing he hadn't handled countless times before. But as dawn approached and the calls kept coming with increasing urgency and frequency, he began to understand that this situation was unlike anything Gaza had seen in recent years. The hospital's emergency phone system was overwhelmed with incoming calls. Wounded civilians began arriving at the facility in numbers that strained the medical staff's ability to provide adequate care. Most alarming of all, the fleet of ambulances that the hospital relied upon to serve the community was rapidly becoming insufficient to meet the dramatically increased demand for emergency medical transport. Mahmud Dr. Salim called out across the busy emergency bay, his voice barely audible above the chaos surrounding them. "I need to be honest with you. This is going to be a very long night, possibly extending well into tomorrow. Are you prepared for that?" Mahmud looked around at the scene unfolding before him. Medical personnel rushing between patients, family members crying and searching for loved ones, the steady stream of wounded individuals requiring immediate attention. Without hesitation, he nodded firmly. "I'm ready, doctor. Whatever needs to be done." True to his word, during the first 12 hours of the crisis, Mahmud transported 18 different patients to various medical facilities throughout Gaza. The cases ranged from wounded civilians caught in the crossfire, to pregnant women going into premature labor due to stress, from elderly patients whose chronic conditions had been exacerbated by the trauma, to children suffering from shock and minor injuries. Despite growing fatigue, Mahmud maintained his focus and continued working without complaint. During a brief break between calls, his colleague Ahmed approached him with genuine concern. "Listen, my friend, you've been going non-stop for hours. Why don't you take a short rest? I can handle the next few calls and give you a chance to recuperate." But Mahmud shook his head resolutely. "Thank you, Ahmed, but I can't stop now. There are still people out there who need our help. Every minute we delay could mean the difference between life and death for someone." The situation took a dramatic turn for the worse at the 24-hour mark. Mahmud was in the process of transporting 3 critically wounded patients to the hospital when a massive explosion occurred less than 50 meters from his ambulance. The blast was powerful enough to spiderweb the vehicle's windows and send debris flying in all directions. Mahmud felt a sharp pain in his head as fragments of glass struck him, and warm blood began trickling down his forehead and into his eyes. Upon arriving at the hospital, a doctor immediately examined Mahmud's injuries. "You've sustained a significant head injury," the physician explained gravely. "There's clear evidence of a concussion, and you're showing signs of disorientation. You absolutely must rest now, or you risk serious complications." But Mahmud was already shaking his head before the doctor finished speaking. "I appreciate your concern, doctor, but I can't rest right now. There are people outside who are counting on us. They don't have anyone else." The doctor was insistent. "But you're injured. You could lose consciousness while driving, which would endanger not only your own life but the lives of your patients." Mahmud walked over to a nearby mirror and assessed his reflection. His forehead bore an obvious wound that would require stitches, and the area around his left eye was beginning to swell and discolor. However, his hands remained steady, his vision was clear, and his determination was unwavering. "I understand your concerns," he told the doctor, "but I can still drive safely. I'm going to continue working." By the 36th hour of the crisis, the situation had deteriorated significantly. More than half of the hospital's ambulance fleet had been damaged beyond immediate repair or was otherwise out of service. Mahmud's vehicle was among the few remaining ambulances still capable of responding to emergency calls. Dr. Salim pulled him aside for a private conversation that would change everything. "I'm afraid I have to ask something difficult of you," the hospital director began. "Most of our other drivers have been injured or their vehicles have been damaged. From this point forward, you're going to be operating essentially alone. You'll be our primary ambulance service for the foreseeable future. Are you prepared to take on that level of responsibility?" Mahmud felt the full weight of what Dr. Salim was asking. Being the sole ambulance driver for an entire region during a crisis of this magnitude was an almost overwhelming prospect. But looking around at the continuing stream of patients requiring emergency transport, he knew there was only one possible answer. "If that's what needs to happen, then that's what I'll do." From that pivotal moment, Mahmud began operating as a one-man emergency medical transport service. His routine became almost mechanical in its efficiency. Receive an emergency call, drive to the location, load the patient or patients, transport them to the appropriate medical facility, and immediately prepare for the next call. There were no breaks, no time for meals, no opportunity to process the gravity of what he was experiencing. The work was relentless and physically demanding, but Mahmud never wavered. The 48th hour brought with it an event that Mahmud would remember for the rest of his life. He had been dispatched to rescue a pregnant woman who had become trapped beneath rubble from a collapsed building. The extraction process had been difficult and time-consuming, requiring the coordinated efforts of several rescue workers to free her safely. However, once she was loaded into the ambulance, it became clear that the stress and trauma of her ordeal had triggered the onset of labor. The woman's contractions were coming rapidly and with increasing intensity. Mariam, an experienced midwife who had volunteered to accompany them, quickly assessed the situation. "We're not going to make it to the hospital in time," she informed Mahmud with urgency in her voice. "This baby is coming now, whether we're ready or not." Mahmud's response was immediate and confident. "We'll make it, trust me." The normal route to the hospital had been blocked by debris and emergency vehicles, making it impassable. Without hesitation, Mahmud diverted to an alternate path that took them through Gaza's older neighborhoods, utilizing a network of narrow back streets and residential areas that most drivers would never consider navigating under normal circumstances, let alone during an emergency. "How do you even know about these roads?" Mariam asked in amazement as Mahmud expertly maneuvered the ambulance through passages that seemed barely wide enough for the vehicle. "I grew up in these neighborhoods," Mahmud explained while maintaining his focus on the challenging driving conditions. "These are the streets where I learned to ride my bicycle, where I played football with my friends after school. I know every turn, every intersection, every possible shortcut." His intimate knowledge of Gaza's geography proved invaluable. They arrived at the hospital with minutes to spare, and the baby was delivered safely in the emergency room. Both mother and child were healthy and stable. As Mahmud prepared to leave for his next call, the new mother grabbed his hand. "Thank you," she whispered through tears of gratitude and exhaustion. "You saved both of our lives tonight." By the 60th hour, Mahmud was operating on pure determination and adrenaline. He hadn't slept in more than 2.5 days. His body ached from the constant physical demands of lifting patients and medical equipment. The wound on his forehead had begun to heal, but he still experienced periodic dizzy spells and headaches from his concussion. Despite these mounting physical challenges, he refused to consider stopping. Dr. Salim confronted him during a brief moment between calls. "This pace is unsustainable. You're going to collapse if you don't rest soon. We can't afford to lose you too." But Mahmud's resolve remained unshaken. "I can't stop now, doctor. Every call might be someone's last hope. Every trip could be the difference between a family staying together or being torn apart forever. As long as I can still drive, as long as there are people who need help, I have to keep going." During the final 12 hours of his extraordinary marathon, Mahmud operated with the efficiency and persistence of a man possessed by a single purpose. He responded to calls across Gaza's entire territory, from the northernmost neighborhoods to the southern districts, from the coastal areas to the inland communities. Each journey brought new challenges: blocked roads requiring creative navigation, patients with complex medical needs demanding careful handling, family members desperate for news about their loved ones. At exactly the 72-hour mark, Mahmud received what would be his final call of this unprecedented shift. A 3-story elementary school building had collapsed completely, and initial reports suggested that 15 children were trapped beneath the rubble. Search and rescue teams were already working to locate and extract the victims, but they needed ambulance support to transport the children to medical facilities once they were freed. Mahmud drove to the school site knowing that this call would likely be among the most challenging of his career. When he arrived, the scene was devastating. What had once been a vibrant educational institution where children learnt and played was now nothing more than a pile of concrete, twisted metal, and debris. However, the rescue teams had made remarkable progress, and they could hear the voices of children calling out from beneath the wreckage. Over the course of the next several hours, the rescue teams methodically extracted all 15 children from the collapsed building. Some had suffered serious injuries requiring immediate surgical intervention, while others had escaped with minor cuts and bruises. Mahmud made multiple trips between the disaster site and various hospitals, ensuring that each child received appropriate medical care based on the severity of their condition. As he was helping to load the final child into his ambulance, the little girl looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too mature for her young age. "Thank you, uncle," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "You're an angel." Mahmud felt tears welling up in his own eyes as he gently secured her stretcher. At that moment he thought of Noor, his own precious daughter, and how he would feel if she had been among those trapped children. When Mahmud finally returned to the hospital after completing that last transport, exactly 72 hours had elapsed since the beginning of his incredible ordeal. As he stepped out of his ambulance, the physical and emotional exhaustion that he had been suppressing throughout the crisis finally overwhelmed him. His legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed onto the pavement outside the emergency entrance. "Mahmud!" Dr. Salim shouted, rushing to his side along with several nurses and other medical staff members. They carefully lifted him and brought him inside for immediate medical evaluation. The diagnosis was severe dehydration, malnutrition, and complete physical exhaustion. Mahmud had literally worked himself to the point of collapse. When he regained consciousness several hours later, he found himself in a hospital bed with Fatma and Noor sitting vigil beside him. His wife's face showed the strain and worry she had endured during his absence, while his daughter's eyes were red from crying. "Dad!" Noor exclaimed, throwing herself into his arms. "I was so scared. I thought something terrible had happened to you." Mahmud held his daughter close, inhaling the familiar scent of her hair and feeling the reassuring warmth of her small body against his chest. "I'm here now, sweetheart. Everything is going to be okay." With her characteristic directness, Noor asked the question that had been on her mind. "How many people did you help during these 3 days, Dad?" Mahmud realized that he had lost count somewhere during the second day of the crisis.
The individual calls and patients had blended together in his memory, becoming part of a larger mission rather than separate, distinct events. Dr. Salim entered the room carrying a clipboard filled with dispatch records and patient transport logs. His expression was one of profound respect and admiration. "I've been reviewing all of our records from the past 72 hours, he announced. "Mahmud, during that entire period, you personally transported 127 different patients to medical facilities throughout Gaza. That's nearly 2 patients per hour, around the clock for 3 straight days." Mahmud was genuinely shocked by this number. He had been so focused on each individual case, each person who needed help, that he hadn't appreciated the cumulative impact of his efforts. 127 people. That meant 127 families who had been reunited with their loved ones. 127 individuals who had received life-saving medical care because of his refusal to quit. "You're not just an ambulance driver anymore," Dr. Salim continued. "You've become a symbol of hope for our entire community. You've shown all of us what it means to serve others selflessly, even in the face of seemingly impossible circumstances." But despite this praise, Mahmud didn't see himself as a hero or a symbol. He had simply done what felt necessary at the time, responding to each emergency as it arose without thinking about the bigger picture. Today, several months after those transformative 72 hours, Mahmud continues to drive an ambulance through the same streets he navigated during the crisis. However, everything about his daily experience has changed dramatically. People throughout Gaza recognize him wherever he goes, pointing him out to their children and friends. "There goes Mahmud," they whisper with unmistakable reverence in their voices. "He's the one who saved so many people during the bombardment. He's our local hero." His daughter Noor, now 9 years old, continues to ask her daily question each evening when he returns from work. "How many people did you help today, Dad?" Mahmud's typical response remains humble and understated. "Only 4 people today, sweetheart. But tomorrow is a new day, and there will be new opportunities to help others." Because Mahmud has learned that every single day brings fresh possibilities to make a positive difference in someone else's life. 6 months after those historic 72 hours, Mahmud received an invitation that would profoundly impact his understanding of what he had accomplished. The families of all 127 people he had transported during the crisis had organized a community gathering to express their gratitude personally. They wanted to show him the faces behind the statistics, to help him understand the true significance of his actions. The gathering was held in a large community center, and it was unlike anything Mahmud had ever experienced. The woman whose baby had been born during that harrowing ambulance ride was there with her healthy, smiling 6-month-old son. All 15 children from the collapsed school attended with their parents and siblings, their faces bright with excitement to see their rescuer again. The elderly man who had suffered a heart attack during the second day of the crisis was present and fully recovered, eager to shake Mahmud's hand and share his story of survival. One by one, these individuals and families approached Mahmud to express their thanks. "You gave us a second chance at life," they told him. "Without your dedication and courage, we wouldn't be here today." For the first time, Mahmud truly comprehended the magnitude of what he had accomplished during those 3 extraordinary days. These weren't just numbers in a logbook or statistics in a report. They were real people with families, dreams, aspirations, and futures that continued because of his refusal to give up when circumstances became difficult. The hospital administration decided to honor Mahmud's service by naming their emergency department after him. At the dedication ceremony, when he saw the bronze plaque reading the Mahmud Al-Zahra Emergency Center, tears of humility filled his eyes. "This recognition should include everyone," he insisted to the gathered crowd. "Every doctor, every nurse, every technician, every security guard, every person who worked during those 72 hours deserves to be remembered and honored." In the months that followed, young ambulance drivers and emergency medical technicians from across Gaza began seeking out Mahmud for mentorship and guidance. "How do you handle the pressure of emergency situations?" they would ask. "How do you maintain your composure when people's lives depend on your decisions and actions?" Mahmud's advice was always the same. Don't focus on yourself or your own fears and concerns. Instead, concentrate entirely on the person in your ambulance who needs your help. Remember that you might be their only hope, their only connection to survival and recovery. That perspective will give you strength you didn't know you possessed. His daughter Noor, now more mature and thoughtful than many children her age, recently shared her own aspirations with her father. "Dad, when I grow up, I want to be exactly like you. I want to help people and save lives just like you do." Mahmud smiled at her words, but his response surprised her. "No, my dear daughter. Don't aim to be like me. Aim to be better than me. Learn from my example, but then find ways to help people that I never could have imagined." This story is inspired by true events and real individuals who demonstrate extraordinary courage and selflessness during times of crisis. Around the world there are thousands of people like Mahmud, ordinary individuals who become extraordinary when circumstances demand heroic action. These unsung heroes work in every profession and come from every background, united by their commitment to helping others regardless of personal cost or risk. Let's not forget these remarkable individuals who remind us of humanity's capacity for goodness, compassion, and sacrifice. Because sometimes the greatest heroes are not the ones who seek recognition or glory, but rather those who simply refuse to stop helping when others desperately need assistance. And Mahmud continues his work today, driving his ambulance through Gaza's streets with the same dedication and care he has always shown. Every morning when he reports for duty, he knows that each call might represent someone's chance at survival, each journey an opportunity to make a meaningful difference in a life that matters deeply to someone else.